Well, hello and welcome back to another UK column interview. And you know what? Happy New Year, because this is my first interview of the new year. And it's Happy New Year too to all of you and to my two guests, Sandi Adams and Roger Meacock. And this is part two of what we believe at UK Column will be a very valuable resource for every farmer and indeed every member of the public. All of us really who want healthy food and local food. And this is going to be an exclusive record, actually, of the future of farming, how we got here, the future of animals, and also our food. And it's taken hours of research. Both Roger and Sandi have literally taken hours to do this. And we believe it's going to stand the test of time, because we could be living in another era of book burning and digital burning. So make sure you download these two interviews, because it's going to be history in the making. And land is valuable. So is agriculture valuable. And at the moment, we're seeing wildfires in the USA, which is claiming a lot of land. We're seeing floods in the United Kingdom, which claims a lot of land. We're seeing solar farms springing up. We're seeing wind farms springing up. But we're not seeing a lot of farming going on. And farmers, are you being told the truth? In part one, Sandi Adams, who you know is an expert by experience and has got nearly 2 decades of researching into the United Nations Sustainable Goals agenda. And Roger Meacock, a consultant veterinary surgeon, brought you a presentation to bring you up to date. How we got here. We don't expect you and farmers, your busy people, to do all of this research yourself, which is why we've tried to condense it into these 2 episodes. Possibly we might have to go into 3. Let's see how we go. But we're going to be looking into sustainable goals. We're going to be looking into everything that's coming up in the future, including super farms. And for farmers, please listen. We know you're busy. To the public, all of you that are listening now, please support your local farms. Farmers, we will support you. We're right behind you. We need your food. We need your beautiful food. We really do. And to small businesses, it'll be you next. We're going to move on to what is happening now in 2025, the sustainable goals. And Sandi and Roger have got another short presentation. And then we're going to be talking about Bovia, Arla. We're going to be talking about what farmers should expect, what vets should expect. So we're going to have a discussion, so please stay with us. But for now, let's say hello and Happy New Year first to Roger. Thank you so much for joining us again. Say hello to everybody.
Hi, everybody. Great to be back, Debbie, and looking forward to what we're about to do.
Fantastic. And Sandi, Happy New Year and welcome back for part 2.
Happy New Year, everyone. I hope you had a good one. Thank you. Yes, it's really great to be back and to do another episode of this. Thank you so much.
Well, it's going to be a hugely valuable resource, I know, moving forwards. And with that, I'm not going to waste any more time, because we've got an awful lot to get through. So Sandi, over to you. Sustainable goals. How did we get here? And we're here now. So what have we got to look forward to?
The sustainable goals, really, they were brought about in 2015 because, as we know, the UN had tried with the 8 Millennium Goals. They had failed to be sort of brought to a conclusion by 2000. They were called the 8 Millennium Goals, and so by 2015 they were getting a bit edgy. Need to accelerate the agenda. And so they put together a huge conference in Rome with the Pope. President Obama flew over to launch the 17 goals of Agenda 2030. And they then called it Agenda 2030. So it was Agenda 21. It became Agenda 2030 in September 2015, when they launched the 17 goals at the Vatican, basically in Rome. And President Obama, he made his keynote speech to the United Nations General Assembly on the future of the world and to unveil Agenda 2030. They launched the 17 goals. And all of this was really a big push to accelerate the 17 goals. And I mean, we could just go into them, if you like, a little bit.
17 goals, which ones specifically are we looking at with regards to farming and land and smart cities and how they're going to land grab from us?
I think life on land is a big one. And life on land is really about revolutionizing the way land works. And a lot of it is being you have to, if you have land, it has to be sustainable land. And that's what they talk about in life on land. Life on land is all about not indulging in anything that the UN feel is unsustainable. And so they've got many NGOs set up, even financial instruments set up now, in order for you to be able to achieve these goals. And some of them are almost unachievable because the 17 goals really want that this particular goal, life on land, is really about controlling the land and not allowing the people that own the land to control it, if that makes any sense.
It does make perfect sense. In fact, it makes it sort of the sustainable goals, and this is what I've been saying all along, is that are unsustainable. And I noticed that goal 2 is zero hunger.
Yeah.
So that dovetails in quite well. I mean, I don't know perhaps which one of you wants to take that, Sandi or Roger, but zero hunger, how will that be impacted by loss of land and farming? Or is that a stupid question?
Well, it's not a stupid question because, it's a big ask to say, sort of zero hunger. The world has always struggled with distribution and some countries having less than others. And their idea is to make everything equitable, which is a very worthy idea. This is what the UN always sort of appear to look as though they're doing, is making everything equal. But the thing is that with zero hunger, their answer to that is GMO products. Sort of a lot of almost like, I mean, the 17 goals are really all about, particularly the zero hunger one, is all about creating literally mass food that can be created on a mass scale. And we don't need that because each country should be producing and should be encouraged to produce their own food. But what they want is a global food supply. And creating that food supply, they want to bring in things like robotics, AI. If you like, they want to control what goes into the food, and also creating artificial food, which is really bad. They want to phase out meat and dairy, as we know, and replace it with these fake meat products that are and soya and all, and now they're even looking at algae and crickets, so that they can phase out meat and dairy and replace them with other forms of protein, which in my view they're not healthy. I think everybody here would agree with that. They're not healthy, and that it's Franken foods, and we don't want it.
Well, I know that we're going to come on to talk about Bovir in a bit, because Roger's done a very serious video to put out a warning on Bovir, so stay tuned for that. So life on land is sustainable goal 15, and you've also of course got sustainable goal 14, which is life below water and fish farms. We mustn't forget fishing, we mustn't forget what's going on as well below the water. So sustainable goals playing into a huge amount of this. So what else, Sandi? Take us on from there.
There's also, zero poverty. How do you achieve that goal? Well, they bring everybody down to the same level. They make everybody equally poor with things like the UBI that they're trying to bring in, universal basic income. So in their view, it's all about equity and levelling up. In fact, levelling up is talked about in our town councils. It is talked about on a global basis as well, that everything has to be equal. And this also goes back to our common future, which was the Bible of bringing everything to be equal. And I just feel that it's an unachievable thing, at the moment, because poverty is something that you can't just throw money at it, because there's so much corruption involved. And what they're doing is with UBI, it's a way of making people completely reliant on the state. And that's what they tested it out in places like, I think it was Nigeria. And it impoverished people because you have a set amount of money and a set amount of carbon credits, because all of that will be linked to your carbon credits. And all of this is really about control. It's not about equity.
It's certainly not sustainable either. So, okay, so we're going to get a world full of poverty. That's something to look forward to, not. But they're also going to end hunger, I notice. Tell us a bit more about ending hunger.
Ending hunger is really about controlling the food chain. And as I said, creating super farms. They've got it in mind to create, if you only have to look at the Sainsbury's Food Report, they're trying to create these massive food super farms and get rid of farmers. And they've even said that in the the agricultural transition plan, 2021 to 2024, you can look it up online. It's there in sight. They talk about, 24/7 robotic farms, massive super farms that are run by robots, and phasing out meat and dairy. And all of that, they're saying, is the way to end hunger. It's impossible, to actually envisage the way they want farms to work. And what could go possibly wrong when you've got corporations running farms? People that know nothing about nutrition and know nothing about, all they know about is money. And that's what we're looking at.
I just wanted to say, it's also in the wording. If you read the 17 Sustainable Goals, how it's worded in the document is very different to what they actually mean. And that can obviously be very confusing unless you realise that there is this other agenda behind it. So they want heritage seeds banned and replaced by annual GMO seeds. They want to record all our habits and monitor everything on the blockchain, and use sensors, as Sandi was saying, so that everything is, provides data that they can then sell on to third parties. And it's all in their own documentation. There was a document that I pulled off the C40 Cities website, and it's actually got what the aims of meat and dairy consumption are. They think it's achievable to get people's meat consumption down to 16 kilos a year. Well, as a carnivore diet, I'm doing that probably every fortnight, every 3 weeks or so. I wouldn't survive. I wouldn't last a year if I was trying to do that. And the idea that they are trying to support farmers and support farming when they've got a declared goal to ultimately eradicate meat and dairy consumption, which basically means get rid of livestock farming. The two don't marry. You can't say you're supporting farming when you've got an agenda to stop meat and dairy consumption by the public. It just doesn't fit together. And so all they can try and then fit to do is sort of monoculture plants. So, yeah.
I just want to say, anybody can download this document. It's called The Future of Urban Consumption in a 1.5 degree Celsius World. And it's the C40 Cities document, headline report. Now, C40 Cities, as Roger said, they've even put together this planetary diet, which is rationing. It's basically rationing. They've got a pie chart of all the things that are sustainable and all the things that aren't, and what you can and cannot eat. And that really is a big, if you really want to go into the C40 cities, they're the ones that were advocating the 15-minute cities, where you could get everywhere within 15 minutes, and it's caused mayhem in Oxford, Cambridge, Canterbury, and this is the way that they're looking. They're looking at really. It's making everything smaller, everything, your life smaller, your diet smaller, and advocating rationing, which is kind of what we're looking at the moment.
Sandi, rationing, I agree. I think we're already in those days. And I think a lot of people are aware of the agenda, and many people are stocking up on things quite rightly. If a farmer is sitting at home now watching this, and the bank account is not looking very healthy, and the outlook is not looking very healthy, and all of a sudden they get a call from someone or a letter through the door that says, hey, you know what, we could use your land for a solar farm or wind turbines or something like that, rather than your agriculture, your dairy farm, or whatever. What is actually happening with regards to incentivization? Because any farmer sitting there now is going to be thinking, well, you know, if I'm doomed, it's probably best off that I get rid of the land and take the money now while I can. What's your advice, and what is the advice that's being given out to farmers specifically at the moment?
The farmers are being de-incentivized, if there's such a word, to farm. They're being told this is all in the agricultural transition document 2021 to 2024. They're being given from 2020 or 2021. They were given 5 years, I think it was. So now it's actually by 2027 their subsidies stop. Their subsidies stop altogether. But until then, their subsidies are sanctioned if they don't. They have to stop doing any farming that is unsustainable in the view of DEFRA. So DEFRA have said, you can't. You have to start phasing out, meat and dairy. And they're really encouraging them. They're more than anything, they're incentivizing them to put up wind farms, solar farms, any sort of renewable energy on their land. They get paid extra for that. They've got to set up businesses because they won't have their subsidies after 2027. So they have to set up what DEFRA has said, sustainable businesses on your land to support yourselves, basically. So it's become a business, and it's a business of not creating food. And what's really worrying is that if you look on the land mapping for most of the city councils or the county councils, if they do have a land mapping, some don't, a future land mapping, they do in North Somerset, you'll see that their land mapping up to, I think it's 2040, there is no provision for food in land mapping. It's all housing. A lot of farms are selling up for housing. A lot of they're going in for renewable energy, loads of solar farms, wind farms, rewilding, herbal lays, glamping, you name it. You can do anything on your farm except produce food, or you're incentivized. There's no food security provision, which I believe is unbelievable. And a lot of people are making noise about this in their town councils. So what we have to do is just talk to the farmers and make them see that this is a very short-sighted view. We've got to be looking at the long-term food security of our planet and our country. So I think that any farmers who are just selling out, they're going to, where's their food going to come from? This is what you have to ask them.
Yeah, Sandy, you made exactly the point I was going to say there was, farmers, if you're not producing food and your mates down the road aren't producing it either, you're going to go hungry the same as we are, because we're going to talk about it in a bit. But some of the measures which and aims that they've got for shipping and air transport and things like that, food won't be coming into the country, because if every country in the world has the same regime, which is what they're trying to make it a global agenda, then there isn't going to be the movement of food across borders. And if we're not producing food in the UK, there isn't going to be any food. And it's really as simple as that. So I would really urge farmers to resist the temptation and find other ways of earning money from their food, which I know we're going to talk about and discuss later. But it's a very short-sighted view to take the money now and then wonder where your food's going to come from in the future.
I think this is a very valuable point, not just for us in the UK, because I think farmers need to be reassured that, especially those of us that are watching this interview, our audience that know the agenda, we really do need to support our British farmers. And this is a global issue, right? So this is going on in other countries. And I would say the same to you wherever you're watching from internationally, whether you're watching in Europe, whether you're watching in the United States or Australia, or wherever you are, please support your local farmers because they're all in the same boat. This model is not just for the UK. I can see some very disturbing slides ahead of me containing pictures of no other than Sir Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum. I can hear everybody groaning now, but who wants to lead us into the World Economic Forum and the pact that was signed in 2019, which has also got us to where we are now?
Yeah, I can do that. Yes, there was a pact signed between the World Economic Forum and the United Nations in June 2019. So, everybody thinks, oh, the World Economic Forum, they're nothing to do with governments and all the rest of it. They absolutely are. They have got influence throughout governments throughout the world. And Klaus Schwab, who is the head of the World Economic Forum, has even boasted on video saying how he has captured governments and got half at the time. He had half of the cabinet of Canada had been through his Young Global Leaders program. And so the idea that governments are actually working for us, I think we need to forget that. They should be working for us. They aren't in power, as they like to call it. They're in office. And there's a very big distinction between power and office, and they're in office. And they should be working for us. But when it boils down to it, they're working for these NGOs who are all being gathered together by the World Economic Forum. And they're putting these global policies out and influencing governments big time. And we know Keir Starmer has already said on video that he prefers Davos to Westminster. So we aren't making these things up. Sandi and I have done lots of research into this, and we're trying to make sure that what we present today, we can back it up with documents and that there are videos to back up what we're saying in terms of this is their own words. These aren't our words and our interpretations. These are their words.
This pact that they signed, it's called the UN Forum Partnership, Strategic Partnership document. And I mean, it's important that farmers know that this is not conspiracy theory. This is all backed up by documents and, sort of events that really did happen. We have to get away from the fact that it's conspiracy. And I think that's what's holding the farmers back from understanding a lot of this. So this is why we're here, really. But the UN Forum Partnership, it was signed between Antonio Guterres, who was the General Secretary of the and still is of the UN, in 2019. It was signed between him and Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum. And it was they decided that they had to accelerate the 17 goals yet again. It wasn't moving fast enough for them. They've got to pull this off by 2030. So they're going for it. And so what they did was they held this meeting in the United Nations headquarters between these two, between the World Economic Forum and the UN. And the partnership identifies 6 areas of focus that they wanted to really accelerate. And it was financing of 2030. How do they finance the 2030 agenda? Climate change, health. Now, this is the one that really stuck in my mind. Digital cooperation. And gender equality and empowerment of women, education, skills to strengthen and broaden their combined impact by building an existing and new collaboration. They wanted health support, well-being for all countries, and all that kind of thing. And what happened really is that they got their digital cooperation, because they say digital cooperation meets the needs of the 4th industrial revolution while seeking to advance global analysis and inclusiveness. So they needed to get digital cooperation completely, get the people to buy into digital cooperation. So the story goes on.
Yeah, obviously, when COVID came along, it became the opportunity to, as Klaus Schwab said, the pandemic presents a rare but narrow window of opportunity to reflect, reimagine and reset our world. And so, as Sandi was saying, they're trying to push this forward fast now, because it's sort of gone from being conversations behind the scenes that very few people knew about, to the point where we are actually now starting to see some of the changes and see some of what they're trying to impose on us. And so COVID was used as a way to do that. And I think the clearest example of that was when we were all in lockdown. they were still putting up the infrastructure for 5G, for all the digital surveillance and all the rest of it. So, it is coming out in the open, and they are trying to push things forward, because I think they think if they can get it to a certain stage, it'll be fait accompli. And by the time enough people wake up and start to object, they will already have their control. And, I do feel that some of the coming food shortages, which I know are going to happen, will be potentially used, as Debbie has already sort of inferred. If we end up with food rationing, that requires identification. And obviously, during the Second World War, everybody had their little paper passports to go and collect their rations for the local shops. But when it comes to now, they're going to use this as a leverage to bring in digital identity, and you won't be allowed to collect your food unless you're on the digital platform. And then that means we're all subjected to the potential of being socially scored in the future. So, this is all being pushed forward very much more quickly now, and it is coming more and more into the open because they have to, because they've got to impose it on us. Klaus Schwab wrote his book, The Great Reset, and The Fourth Industrial Revolution, the two books. So, if you really want to understand that, they've written it all down. Or Klaus Schwab has, and it's very dystopian, which reflects his background, political influences with Mao Zedong and all sorts.
As Roger said, during the lockdowns, this digital cooperation was forced upon us whilst we were literally sleeping. We were in lockdown, and all the infrastructure went in, as Roger said, and the 15-minute cities were implemented during it. All the infrastructure went in for those as well. Let's not forget that was really trying to just push almost a smart city agenda onto us, but big cities just locking them down. What they're doing right now, and this was a prime example of it, the digital corporation was a start of the 10-year transition that Klaus Schwab had also said in his book, from our normal price-based sort of free market shareholder capitalism to stakeholder capitalism. It's a way of corporations holding all the power instead of the people holding the power. It's a corporate takeover. It's an oligarchy, is what Klaus Schwab's talking about in the Fourth Industrial Revolution.
It's almost as though we're talking about the weaponization of nature almost.
Exactly what Sandi is describing there, this sort of partnership between government and corporations, that sort of stakeholder capitalism. Mussolini described that as the definition of Nazism, which is where corporate and government take hold. And that's the whole thing. Stakeholder means those who are actually involved in those industries. So they will have dictate to the people who use those services and products, rather than the consumer sort of demanding and dictating which direction we go in, because we are the people and we're supposed to be in power. So, it's Nazism by its old name, but they're calling it stakeholder capitalism to try and wrap it up and make it sound something a little bit more advanced than that. But, and we know that there's also the UN Charter 109, which makes provision for the United Nations to be revised and replaced. And this was supposed to happen in 1959, but it never actually happened. But they're trying to move it forward now. And in the same way that the United Nations replaced the League of Nations in 1945, they're calling it United Nations 2.0, but they're also talking about it being a new global government, so that it would be a new way of the United Nations effectively taking over our governance totally. And there was actually a conference penciled in, I think, for 2026, but they said they definitely want it by 2030. So, these agendas are absolutely real, and we're obviously getting close to these dates where, a few years ago it sounded like a long way away, but actually they're not very far away now. And this is why people need to be aware and start to sort of realise what's going on, so that we can object now.
Just going back to when you're mentioning the Great Reset and the Fourth Industrial Revolution, the books, I would say to anybody that hasn't read them, they are quite shocking. I mean, it is the plan, it's the blueprint almost, that it's in your face. But I want to remind everyone as well that Klaus Schwab was knighted by the now King Charles. And whilst many think that it was Klaus Schwab that announced the Great Reset at the World Economic Forum, actually, it was Prince Charles, when he was Prince Charles. So I just wanted to throw that in. But I mean, this is big money here. This is a big financial gain for those in control. Roger, do you want to take us into the financial side of it?
In 2023, they put together a new financial instrument was created by the Securities and Exchange Commission, the SEC, at the New York Stock Exchange. So they're looking to monetize everything. I mean, I think there's a website where they talk about, using trees and everything within nature and giving it a monetary value, which countries can then effectively use to underpin, in the same way that gold used to underpin currency. They're looking to use nature now to underpin currency and keep their Ponzi scheme going from that point of view, and the new digital currency. So they're trying to maneuver and use are what effectively are the people's assets, because the world belongs to us all. They're trying to use that to control themselves and to back up governments, and to use that to impose taxes and whatever else. I mean, I think there was even a video of somebody at the World Economic Forum saying, people need to stop thinking of oxygen being free. So it's got to the point where you'll have to pay a tax in order to breathe. But I mean, how they're going to enforce that is beggars belief. Maybe that's where the medical aided assisted dying comes in. But it's so ridiculous. It sounds so outlandish that people don't think this is what they're planning. But it is, they are on video of saying these things. So it is absolutely coming down the track, unless we say anything differently.
Absolutely. Just to sort of endorse what Roger has just said, they did create this financial instrument by the Securities and Exchange Commission at the request of the New York Stock Exchange, and it's called these financial instruments called natural asset companies, natural asset classes, natural asset corporations, and they're based on environmental stewardship. So really it's about the stewardship, and the NACs hold the rights to ecological performance. So you're almost given stewardship of your land. You can own it, but you can't control it because you have to be checked up on, basically, to make sure that you're sustainable. And these companies were given license to control lands, both public and private, that would be required to block any unsustainable activities, such as meat production or dairy farming, that lead to the degradation of ecosystems in their view. Basically, how do you make take control of land and make it profitable while not owning it? Well, they use this ecological performance, such as nature conservation, restoration, or sustainable management. So the NACs, the natural asset companies, would quantify and monetize these natural outputs using a system, and it's all the farmers are having to comply to this biodiversity net gain, or if they don't now, they will do. And biodiversity net gain is the financial instrument that's used as a scoring system. It's a bit like ESGs, or environmental and social governance contracts in businesses. So they will be scored. And so these natural assets that would normally profit the farmers and the landowners would now belong to corporations run by what many would call environmental special interests. So that's it. You own your land, but you don't control it. You don't profit from it.
Basically, they're going to stop you pretty much doing everything, which is what the World Economic Forum said in the first place. You will own nothing. We go back to that, and as we're speaking now, I've just seen an announcement come through to say that President Trump, who has, as we're speaking, hasn't yet been inaugurated, but will be attending Davos this year, which is interesting, don't you think? But all of this is going to lead to, they're going to kill us through starvation, by the sounds of it, because I'm seeing a very stark headline on your next slide, which says the coming food catastrophe. And this is not just to farmers. I know that we're doing these presentations for farmers, but we're also doing it for you, for the public, because unless we get the food, we can't eat. So take us through what kind of catastrophe. I mean, is this as bad as it looks?
Well, yes. I mean, farmers are saying that we're heading for a massive food shortage worldwide. This will be blamed, obviously, on climate change. That's what they do. You've got, wars. You've got Ukraine and Gaza, all threatening food supply chains internationally. With net zero policies preventing farmers from farming food, we have a perfect storm for some kind of, sort of famine, if you like. If we don't do something about it, and the farmers have the power in order, if they're fully informed to avert this, I believe anyway. And the budget change of the inheritance tax was not a miscalculation. It's all part of the deliberate attack on UK farming and small businesses in step with global plans. Governments are following the UNWEF agenda and don't work for the UK public. They're not working for us. They're taking their orders from the WEF and the United Nations, unfortunately.
You're quite clearly showing, that in a slide that you have here to say that 2023-2024 was the worst crop failure since World War II in the UK. And of course, war brings disruption for every single service and provision you can think, not just destruction to land and crops and farms and buildings and people, but to food supplies and transportation and to delivery as well. I mean, where is this leading? Because we know that moving forward, we're looking at electric vehicles. We're looking at, they don't want us to travel anywhere. They don't want us. I know that you've been looking very carefully at the Absolute Zero report, and many of our viewers will know about Absolute Zero, but can you talk about that a little bit as well? Because I think that plays into the whole scheme and agenda moving forward.
Yes, the Absolute Zero, it's called the UK Fires Absolute Zero report. You can look at it online, it's still there. Just type in, it must be UK Fires Absolute Zero, and it comes up. Now, this document was produced and commissioned by the UK government, and they commissioned it in, I think it was 2019, or 20, something like that. Anyway, it was commissioned by the UK government through top universities like Oxford and Cambridge as a white paper, really, and how could we achieve absolute zero? No, forget net zero. How do we get to absolute zero carbon CO2 in the atmosphere, which, as you and I know, would create, things wouldn't live. Zero CO2 is zero life, basically. And so, but duly, they came up with this report. And I think what's interesting is, I think it's page 4 of this report. If you do have a look at it, they've got a very colourful, colour-coded roadmap, really, to 2050. From 2020 to 2029, which is from now, or from 2020 to 2030. They've got a 10-year window, and then it goes on from there for 2030 to 2040, and then obviously 2050 is when you hit absolute zero. So we've got net zero until 2049. Basically, it says in this, air travel and shipping to be phased out between 2030 and 2049. So how do we get food imports? I mean, it's like being a prison island, because they're also shipping and flying. By 2049, they want to stop it. Fossil fuels to be phased out. How would farm machinery operate, as EVs are totally impractical? What's the point? No beef or lamb production after 2049. No wood-burning stoves, no gas boilers, no gas appliances. And we already know that they're trying to phase out gas and wood-burning stoves at the moment. So putting in things that are inefficient, like ground source heat pumps, things like that. Appliances, everything restricted to electric. And the size reduction to be cut for the power requirement. Transport and energy to be cut by 60%. How will food be moved around the country? construction, all concrete and mortar to be phased out, and retrofitting of all houses to comply with net zero regulation. So all of this is a perfect storm for all of us literally living in poverty, A, and B, not having food. The food distribution would break down if we got to absolute zero. So that's my take on it. Do look up that document. The absolute. It's called. I mean, I had this on my website in 2014. It was 2015. So it's a big. It's a big document, but it's worth going through it. And certainly, even if you can't go through it, look at page 4, which is the roadmap to 2050.
It's quite interesting, isn't it, how some of what's been announced very recently in Parliament is also feeding into this, because we've had Keir Starmer saying he wants the UK to be the centre of AI, and yet I know that both Google and Amazon have said in the United States they need to build 4+ nuclear power stations just to power their AI future. And so, if they're trying to stop us over here from having gas power and trying to be reliant on wind and solar with no fossil fuels, I mean, so what's going to happen is the electricity just going to go into AI in the UK, and then the people won't have any. We'll have blackouts at home. There's only a finite amount of electricity that can be produced. I mean, the whole thing is absolutely, completely unsustainable. And as Sandy was saying, this is a global plan. So when they're saying no air shipping and travel for us, this actually applies to all these other countries as well. It is quite unbelievable how this is, they even thought this is even going to be possible.
It's not only unbelievable, I don't think. I think it's completely unsustainable, and just add to, before we go on to my next favourite subject, flooding, because I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking, we might even have to go to a part 3, but I really do want to get to Roger's latest announcement about Bovia. So hold on tight, because I promise that will be included in this interview. But I just want to remind people that it's just been announced. Remember the nudge unit, nudging you into doing things? Well, they've just been recontracted to nudge you into having heat pumps. And as Sandy's just said, number one, they're incredibly expensive. For some houses, you're going to have your whole central heating system ripped out and replaced, or you can have a hybrid. But whatever, it's going to be a massive cost, up to £20,000. So the nudge unit have been employed to nudge you, incentivize you into having a system that is not only inefficient, but is going to cost you an absolute fortune. So just to add that on the nudge unit and heat pumps, because that's the next big thing coming up, along with carbon credits, of course. So let's go to my favourite subject, which is floods, because we were talking earlier, and in my introduction I was saying, and our love, thought and prayers do go out to everybody that's being affected by wildfires, wherever you are in the world. And of course, our attention at the moment is drawn to California. And, what I'm seeing in fires in America, I see in Europe and the UK floods. And I see no insurance, conveniently, for fire victims. It's the same in the UK for floods. But let's look at the deliberate destruction of land using floods. Sandy, take us from there.
It's interesting, because I was living in Somerset in 2014, and 65 square miles of Somerset were underwater. It was the worst spring rainfall that they'd had in many, many years. And banks of the River Brue, the Parrett and the Tone had burst their banks, and people were literally in terrible trouble. They were having to evacuate their houses, and it was really, really bad. And a few of us went down to help with the sandbagging. And what was interesting is that there was no help from the government, the Environment Agency, or the Army, the Navy, or anything. The only people that had come to help the people of Somerset were there was an aid organisation called CALSA, their international Sikh aid organisation, and they'd flown in from the Haiti earthquake to help the people of Somerset, because the people of Somerset, the locals, got in touch with them. And the whole operation was run by the local pub, the village hall, and this amazing organisation, Sikh organisation. I thought this was very, very odd, because we were all doing our best, but there was no one to be seen. And sure enough, all the media were gathering on the bridge, watching everything rise, and nobody did anything. And it took days and days for the army to arrive, and basically they spent an hour doing what I would call a photo shoot, passing the bags to each other, and then they went. And then Prince Charles arrived, and he was taken down the banks of the River Parrett on a wooden throne, and he was saying something must be done. And he went off, and the Environment Agency were nowhere. But what really made me wake up to what was happening is a lot of the locals were saying, and also a journalist down there said to me, this is deliberate, because they've stopped the pumping stations, they haven't dredged the Reams for decades since the Environment Agency were put in charge. Nothing has been done to maintain the ability for the natural drainage, that had gone on. All the infrastructure to drain the levels had been decommissioned. Basically, they just let everything silt up. One of the journalists, who was a fantastic bloke called Christopher Booker, said to me, "This is Agenda 21." And I said, "Well, I'm looking at all that, because this was in my early days of research." And he said, "Look at Policy 6 of the Environment Agency." And I later learned that area where Policy 6, that had been implemented in 1997 by Baroness Young, was actually the area that was designated as a floodplain with with Environment Agency Policy 6 by Baroness Young for biodiversity, for wading birds, to be deliberately flooded for wading birds, and for the RSPB. And that didn't make sense to me, because there's already an RSPB sort of bird sanctuary just down the road. So this was all part of literally reclaiming land, a land grab. And getting rid of livestock, because all the livestock had to go. They were all flooded out. And what's interesting is if one looks at Policy 6, you can see that the pink area on the policy map is exactly the area that flooded on at that time. And they're kind of doing it again. At the moment, we're getting consultations all along the coastline, particularly where I live in Somerset, saying, that the levels will flood now due to climate change and sea level rise. And so what we're finding is that they're holding all these consultations and more or less preparing people for what they call resilience. They've got to become resilient to the flooding, like move all your electrical sockets up the wall, put everything above the flood level in your kitchen. And all this, it's almost like normalizing flooding, as though it's going to happen anyway, and you'll have to deal with it. The fact is they're not maintaining the infrastructure that was put there 400 years ago to stop the levels from flooding. And for me, I'm seeing it as a way of getting rid of farmland, because there's another issue with the coastline right by the nuclear power station that they're building. EDF and the Chinese are building a big power station. And unfortunately, they've said that because they're using the water to cool the reactors, the fish stocks are being sucked into this process. And therefore, they've got to have more sea for the fish. And they're going to re-sea all the salt, basically, the grazing salt marshes, which is where the cattle go to just graze the salt for certain periods of the year, and then they move on to the grassland. But they want to take away a whole load of farmland and turn it into sea, which is madness. Why can't they put a filter to stop the fish going into the reactors? I don't understand it. But all I know is it's another way of getting rid of farmland.
Well, I'm taking a big deep breath, because and we are going to get to the future of food. I'm going to go to the future of food, Roger, to you next. But before I do, I have to say that Prince Charles was doing a lot in his reign, because he came to me as well. I met him when he came to my area, when my area flooded. And as a repeated flooded victim of 102 times now, yeah, that's right, 102 times, I can tell you that what's happening to you is happening to communities all over the country, including my own. And a lot of it is because there's been no investment into the water infrastructure, not just the environment agencies, pumps and their infrastructure, but also water company infrastructure. And what we've been getting is that water companies aren't statutory planning consultees. So they have no say in whether a housing development goes on. Is anybody checking that the infrastructure that is being plumbed into that housing development can cope? The answer is no. So what we're getting is an overwhelm. We're getting private companies performing public duties, and we're getting local authorities and water companies using homes as attenuation tanks for sewage floods and for surface water floods. And there is no legislation for flooding on land. The EA are the regulators for what happens in a waterway or in the sea, in coastlines, but there is no regulator for floods that happen on land. And, you know, I live in an area that has a lithium mine, a desalination plant, and sewage spills all in one area. And that is not good for the environment. It's ecocide, basically. It's not good for the environment, and it's certainly not good for humans to live in. So I had to say that, because the future is water. We all need water to live, and water is now questionable, and how badly contaminated is our water. So, you know, floods, engineered floods, I'm with you 100%. So, yeah, and I am mindful now that, you know, we're literally out of time. And I've made all of these big promises to everybody that we're going to be talking about eggs, and we're going to be talking about mad cow disease, and we're going to have to do a part 3. But I did promise you to bring you up to date with Bovir. And before I show a video that Roger has put out on Bovir, I want Roger just to very quickly remind, if you could do it very quickly, Roger, just give us a quick reminder, because 2 weeks ago, everybody was talking about Arla, everybody was talking about Bovir. What was it? Was it safe? Can you introduce the video that we're about to see? It's only a short video, but could you just give us a quick introduction?
Just to remind people about Bovir, it's a product that's put in cattle feed, and it changes the or changes what goes on in the rumen, which is the part of the stomach that ferments the grass that the cows eat. And the idea is that the cows will produce less methane, because methane, they think, is a greenhouse gas. Okay, so Arla put out a tweet basically saying that they were going to start they were having a trial with 30 farms to use this Bovir to reduce the methane, and obviously the milk would be being produced by these farms. And there was quite a big uproar on Twitter, which I'm sure everybody's aware of. I was sort of concerned about it. I read some of the trials, and I wasn't convinced that they'd gone on for long enough and all the rest of it. And I was also concerned that it was classified as a feed additive in the UK, although the FDA had classified it as a drug over there. So I decided to write to the Veterinary Medicines Directive, the VMD, but also the Chief Veterinary Officer, to say why hasn't Bovir been checked, and why hasn't it been classified as a drug? Yeah, so the video gives a little bit of an explanation as to the response that I got.
And here's that piece of video that Roger put out. Please watch and listen and share.
Through an email exchange with the UK Veterinary Medicines Directive, VMD, and Chief Veterinary Officer, CVO, I challenged the VMD to explain why they have not categorised Bovir as a veterinary pharmaceutical when it has been in the USA by the FDA. VMD informed me that Bovir had self-categorised its own product as a feed additive despite the fact that it is only authorised in the UK for use in lactating dairy cows. It specifically says it is not for use in dry cows, heifers, bulls or calves. If it is safe enough to be considered a feed additive, it should be universally safe for feeding to all cattle. Due to the self-categorisation of Bovaer as a feed additive, the Food Standards Agency and Food Standards Scotland carried out the UK's official authorisation process for Bovaer. There is no facility within the FSA or FSS to make a full and proper veterinary assessment of Bovaer. The CVO informed me that this consequently means that no official health and welfare evaluation has been carried out in the UK with respect to Bovaer's impact on the cows being fed it. To be fair, she raised this point herself last autumn, but still the VMD, of which she is part, allowed the manufacturers to self-determine that Bovaer be categorised as a feed additive and to go ahead with feeding trials in the UK. This is a complete derogation of duty by the VMD in my opinion. The VMD defended this on the basis that 35 other countries have also derogated their duty in not properly assessing Bovaer either. To be clear, there are no studies that have looked specifically at Bovaer's impact on fertility, metabolic disease, lameness, mastitis, or any other aspect of cattle health. The longest trial used by the FSA to assess Bovaer fed it to cows for only 15 weeks, despite the fact that a whole lactation lasts over 300 days and Bovaer is intended to be fed at every lactation throughout their life. There is zero information on the cumulative effect of feeding Bovaer over a number of years. The CVO informs me that she is awaiting assessment by the UK Vet Risk Group, who are currently trying to find out more information. In the words of the CVO, this may take some time. In the meantime, those dairy farmers who are already feeding Bovaer are probably blissfully unaware that no veterinary assessment with regards to their cows' health and welfare has been undertaken. They have every right to reasonably expect that such an assessment has been performed. Bovaer should be withdrawn from use until it has been properly assessed, not only for its health and welfare impact on cattle, but to make a full and proper assessment as to whether it makes any difference to climate overall. On the basis that it has now been proven that the Earth temperature is not determined by greenhouse gas radiation, the production of methane, CO2, or any other supposed greenhouse gas is immaterial. Methane and CO2 have never been a problem and never will be a problem.
Wow, that was very powerful, Roger. Just very briefly, and we will talk more about Bovaer and Arla in part 3, but very briefly, is there anything you want to say after watching yourself?
Farmers can no longer trust that what they are being advised to feed or give to their cattle has been adequately tested. I think we've already said in the last interview I did with you on my own that the PCR test isn't suitable for being used in a clinical situation, and yet it is for still being used for testing animals for clinical disease. So farmers are going to have to start questioning everything that they're being advised to and consider whether it's in their animals' best interest to subject them to being tested and whether products that they are being advised to use are actually being properly tested either now, it seems. But the big take home and the real big in climate message that I think needs to be shouted from the rooftops is that there has been a study published where it proves that there's a completely different model to explain climate, planetary temperature, and it not only works for our planet Earth, but it also works for other planets as well. And the data fits, unlike the climate change model that's been used to push the whole net zero fiasco, is based on models that don't consider all the cycles that naturally take place, and is based purely on the idea that there's a greenhouse gas effect. Well, given that paper, a recent paper, and there's a great video on YouTube, and it's called Beyond the Greenhouse Gas, or Beyond Greenhouse Effect. And I'd urge everybody to watch it. It's quite long, but it's worth watching. But it does explain that there is a different model that fits the data much better. And on that basis, anything that's being pushed through on the back of net zero has absolutely no vindication whatsoever as far as I'm concerned. So, this is where we need to sort of stand up and I've urged the chief veterinary officer and the VMD, say, why haven't senior groups, including them within the veterinary profession, why aren't we standing up and saying, for the cattle, for livestock farming and all the rest of it, on the basis of this it alone, it's enough that we don't need to be pushing these measures on our farmers, and the land doesn't have to be sacrificed. We've got little enough really fertile land. A lot of the land that's farmed in the UK is quite marginal. It's only fit for pasture. And so, we need this land for food. We don't need it for energy. We're not under the same pressure that they're trying to make out that we are. So let's find other technologies that don't take up our food. And I would urge the farmers to resist on that basis as well.
And resist is the big message. If you like what the UK column is doing, and you feel that you've gained from this interview, which I'm pretty sure you will have done, please share our content. Please tell people that we exist and that this information really needs to go to everybody, to farmers, to members of the public. Do you see it now? This isn't just an inheritance tax agenda. This is a much more dangerous, dark agenda. And British farmers listening, we need you. We support you. And please hear what we're saying, because this research has taken years. Everything is evidence. And I'd like to thank you both, Roger and Sandi, very much for all this amazing hard work and passion that you put into this for all the right reasons. And on that note, I will promise everyone there will be a part 3 if you're both in agreement. And first of all, I'm going to hand over to Roger for, as always, your last word. Thank you, Roger.
Thanks, Debbie. I'll make it short after the last one. We'll just reiterate what I've just said. Resist. We don't need to go down this agenda, and provided we all do stand up, I do think it's going to be positive. And the good thing about that's come out of Bova and the Arla story so far is that it has pushed people to find their local farmers, and for local farmers to then to start supplying their local people too. So there is positive coming out of this. So it might sound all a little bit doom and gloom, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. But we've just got to look to see that light and move towards it.
And yes, you're absolutely right. Every cloud does have a silver lining, and we're all in this together. And on that, Sandi, thank you so much for all your incredible hard work. And if you're open to our part 3, then you're always most welcome. We'd love you to join us for part 3. And it's over to you for your last word.
Thank you, Debbie, and thanks for the opportunity for us to get this out. Without you, we wouldn't be able to. Thank you. I think, as Roger said, it is about a resistance. It is about a resistance. And I think if farmers knew really what was facing them and the long-term implications of what is going on, I think every farmer would agree that, that things have to change. They can't, they can't be pushed around like this. And, this whole global governance of farming, and it is a land grab. And if they can see it's a land grab. And absolutely, as Roger said, the Bovia, I call it a scandal, really. It is a scandal. It's scandalous that managed to get into the food chain. People are beginning to look at the ingredients as well of stuff in supermarkets and realizing that they possibly need to be more aware of what is going into their food. I've noticed a lot of people looking at ingredients now and realizing that there are certain ingredients that aren't good for them. And the Bovia thing has really highlighted that. And the more awareness people have, the more they'll want these natural products, which is the way we should be going. And the farmers I believe that if they really knew this agenda and knew that the long-term thing is going to affect future generations, their children, their grandchildren, their grandchildren's children, whatever, they wouldn't be going along with this. And we have to make them, sort of somehow get them to realize that this is not a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy, but it's not. It's a conspiracy on them, not the other way around.